All right, what is up, everybody? We are back for another weekly Wednesday live Q&A, and we're going to get things going this week. We are going to be talking about all things off-season. So for those of you who are physique competitors, obviously we know the importance of having a proper off-season, making sure that we have enough time to grow. After all, this is bodybuilding, and we need to make sure that we are, growing enough to make improvements year after year. So we're going to get into the questions, and what I always do, is we post a topic every single Wednesday on my Facebook page, and after that, I just kind of leave it up to you guys to see what you want to hear. So once again, this week's topic is going to be off-season. So everybody, welcome, and we're going to get right into the questions. First question, starting us off. Let me get to them. Once again, these are on Facebook, so all my followers kind of, see what they want to say. Matt said, "What are the determining factors for when you do a mini cut, and are they always required during long off seasons?" So Matt, what are the determining factors? One, if you just start feeling bad, if your performance is going down, if you're feeling sluggish in the gym, if you're just feeling sluggish overall, you don't want that to happen, because sometimes that happens when your weight gets too high, when you're carrying around too much fat. If breathing starts to get hard, you're walking up a flight of stairs and you're just feeling deconditioned, that's when you're going to want to do a mini cut. So those are some of the factors. Food is also a factor, right? If you are consuming a ton of food and you just can't force down anymore, that's happened to me before. I was on 700 grams of carbs at one point in time in the middle of my off season, and I just couldn't physically eat anymore, and it was painful. I know that may sound great to some people, but you try eating 700 grams of carbs a day and see how you feel. It's not necessarily the greatest feeling in the world, so I decided to do a mini cut after that. Are they always required in the off season? Absolutely not. So that was Matt's second point. They are not always required in the off season if we are keeping our weight, within striking distance of stage weight. And I've talked about striking distance before. With men, I like to see under 30 pounds ideally. With women under 20, somewhere around there. Obviously, that's going to differ from person to person, based off of how they look and how their body composition is. Holly, I see you tuned in. Thanks for joining. There was a follow-up question to Matt's, and it was actually asked by Marie Funk. And she said, bouncing off of that great question, the approach to the mini cut, short and intense or more slow and steady? So I'll answer that one. And Marie also had a second point to it. Mini cuts, I would prefer to go short and quick, especially in the off season. Now with my contest prep that I'm currently going through, you guys know that I'm basically taking this down into 3 different phases or 3 different mini cuts. So I guess, the word mini cut can be thrown around. It can be used with a phase also. But if you're in the middle of an off season, you're not ready to, you're not getting ready for a show, you just want to lose a few, I'd go hard and fast, 6, 8 weeks, get it over with, cut your food aggressively, add cardio as needed, and then just, start increasing from there. Her second follow-up question is also referring to which method of deficit for mini cuts. Drop calories first and then add cardio. Okay, perfect. No, I would definitely go out of the gate by dropping calories more quickly. I am, once again, not a huge fan of cardio. I talked about that in my last episode of Dominate Every Aspect, was actually focused on all cardio. And I'm just not a fan of doing cardio even during a contest prep. I know that some people have to do it. I might eventually have to, but right now, I'm just not going to do it, and I sure as hell don't like to do them for my mini cuts. So I would just focus all on diet, and the main reason is because obviously when we are in the middle of an off season, we're a little bit heavier, and we have the food to spare. So that way, we could just cut the food, and we could just focus on still hitting our weights into the gym and not having to worry about cardio. So great follow-up question, Marie. Sam asked, What are the biggest mistakes? What is the biggest mistake that you've seen people make in the off season? So I'll start there. Sam has a couple follow-up questions here. What is the biggest mistake I've seen people make in the off season? I mean, I have a few. I'll admit I have a few. So I'll get to those in a sec. If I had to pick one to start off with, is that they get too heavy. It's a major mistake in an off season, and I've seen people literally eat themselves out of competing for years at a time, which is unbelievable. I know it's unbelievable, but they get so heavy. I mean, I've seen pro bodybuilders get 60 pounds above stage weight, and sometimes that is like, it's almost too much to come back from. So that would be another major mistake. One other one is I think that people just don't train hard in their off seasons. They think that it's the only time that they need to train hard is during their contest prep, and they just dial it back for the majority of their off season. That's when all the gains are made. The gains are not made during prep. Especially for natural athletes, like we have to work even harder during our off seasons to gain muscle, and then work once again very hard just to sustain that muscle during our contest prep. So I think those are like the two biggest mistakes that I see people make, is one, just getting too heavy, and then two, just like not trying, not training hard enough, not trying in the gym anymore. That's one of the two biggest mistakes that I would see if I had to pick two. I know Sam only asked for one. What is the other thing or a few things that you could think of to make the biggest difference in a successful offseason? So great that Sam, that was another great follow-up question to her first one. So let's see here. I would say a couple of things to make themselves more successful in your offseason is do what I just said not to do, is maintain a good body composition, focus on increasing your weights in the gym, and then not necessarily worrying too much about the scale. Don't get fat, but your goals need to shift when you are in off-season mode. And I think a lot of people look at the scale a little bit too much when we're in the off-season. So I think actually getting away from the scale might help some. Sure, weigh yourself a couple times a month. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're still hitting your numbers, within reason. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit more flexible in the off season, but I would say those are like the biggest differences to make a successful off season. You still want to hit your numbers with roughly. I don't necessarily say that you have to track to the gram in the off season, and I don't. I'll be honest with you guys. I mean, usually I track like 5 or 6 days, like spot on in the off season. And that one other day, I mean, I'm damn close, but I'm definitely not spot on. I tend to go out, with my family, with my wife on that 7th day, and I don't necessarily have like a free meal, but I just estimate a lot more. I did see that Jacob asked a question. He said, "Do you find that most of your compound lifts should be lower reps, around 3 to 8 reps, lowering volume?" That you had during prep, or should you continue the same volume? Kind of open-ended question, trying to plan ahead for October, November. So those of you who do not know, Jacob, he's amateur bodybuilder trying to turn pro this year, and what he's getting at is, do you keep like the same volume, low reps going into prep? And that's a tough one, man, and some people can lift heavier weights for longer. And by that I mean, I'll just use myself as an example, like I always do, is that when I get down like to the nitty gritty, at least last time, we'll see what happens this time. But I remember, and I don't bench now, so I guess I won't be able to use this as a marker. But I remember last time I was trying to bench and I couldn't do like 225, and before that I was benching like 295 for sets of 3, and I couldn't bench 225 for 3s, and my strength just went out the door. Now, this time around, I'm still going to try to hold out a lot longer than I did and actually stick with the major movers. But yes, Jacob, I would recommend trying to stick with the big movements within reason, right? I mean, if you're going to tax yourself on these 3 to 8s, and it's going to put you in a position to be potentially injured, I would not recommend that. But if you feel comfortable enough still moving relatively heavy weights, go for it. And, oh, what's up, Chase? Thanks for tuning in, man. And So I would say that's like the biggest determining factor, especially at the end of prep. Like we have to be healthy throughout the majority of prep or throughout all of the prep, hopefully. So what we want to do is pick movements that we could stick with and progress on. Now, we all know that strength's going to go down, and especially our leverages change, when we lose weight. The fat distribution is just different. And then our joints, we do have to keep that in mind too. There's just not as much padding on our joints. They're going to take more of a beating, when we get to a lower body weight. So is squatting and deadlifting going to be necessarily right for everybody? No. I don't know if I will squat all the way till the end. We'll have to see. Right now, I'm kind of just sprinkling it in a couple times a month, but I'm not going to be squatting every single week just because it was already kind of taxing my lower back. I've been struggling with back injuries in the past. That, and I felt like it was just fatiguing me a little bit too much. And I do see that Jacob asked another follow-up question here. He said, I'm doing higher volume right now, 6 to 12 reps with high volume. I meant postseason. Should I lower the volume or progressing the lower rep ranges? Sorry. Oh, no, Jacob, yeah, you're fine. So I would say that you should just have a wide range of total volume with reps. Like right now, he's saying, he's doing higher volume right now around 6 to 12. I go up to 20 no matter what. So, that's me. Sometimes I go to 25, and I think I know what Jacob's more getting at now, is that he's saying, like, do I change my workouts only basically for my contest prep or the off season? And the answer is no. In my opinion, I pretty much work out the same if it's contest prep or if it's the off season. Like I did say, sometimes I will pull movements if I feel like they might injure me potentially, or if they're just really, really fatiguing me and I could focus on other things properly. But I keep my rep ranges pretty much exactly the same no matter if it is off season. Sure, I might lift a little bit heavier, a little bit more in the lower left rep ranges in the off season when my body weight's a little bit higher and I could feel more comfortable moving heavier weight. But overall, I typically keep my rep ranges steadily. So everybody knows that I pretty much run push-pull legs. One day a week, I'm doing like heavy legs, and then the other day a week when I'm training legs, I'm doing high rep. So on that heavy day, like today I did my heavy day, and I go as low, this may not sound low to some people, but I go as low as 8, and I go as high as like 10. So that's my low day, quote-unquote low day. On my high day, I go from 15 to 25, and that's my high rep day. The volume is roughly equated just because the weight's a little bit different. I don't necessarily track my volume daily like I used to. I just try to push as much weight over time as I can. Matt also asked another follow-up question. This is just kind of spiraling here. He said, would you say energy expenditure would be much different then? I would say overall that energy expenditure is roughly the same during contest prep and in off season. Although if you are technically lifting heavier weights, like I said before, I tend to not do some major movers, or I might do, like I might squat like every other week. I would say that energy expenditure might not be as high. But then again, in contest prep, your energy expenditure is going to be a little bit higher just because you are trying to lose weight. So in theory, in the off season, your energy expenditure actually might be lower just because the goal is to maintain or to increase weight. But that's just my 2 cents on that. Matt, if you want to ask me another follow-up question to energy expenditure, go ahead so I kind of know a little bit better what you're talking about there. Julie asked, besides strength progression, do you have any suggestions on how to tell if physique improvements, aka muscle growth, are progressing at a good pace? So as I talked about earlier in this video, it is very hard for natural athletes to put on muscle quickly, right? And side note here, when somebody walks into their first day in the gym, and they look at me and I take them through a couple exercises, and they're like, well, I don't want to get too big too fast. And I'm always thinking to my head, I've been trying to get too big for 6 years and it still hasn't happened yet. So it can be very hard, especially in the off season when we're in a surplus, when our body fat is higher, to gauge visual progression. I mean, we can definitely take pictures, but like from week to week, from month to month, shit. I mean, I would take like progress pictures, a handful of times a year when I was in my off season over the past 3.5 years, and it's been a long off season for me. What I have noticed though, and what thank God, is last time I was going into a contest prep when I was like 194 pounds. I was much softer this time. I mean, I was much harder this time than I was last time when I was 194 pounds, if that makes sense. So obviously my body composition changed over that time period, but it happens very, very slowly. So yeah, I mean, taking pictures can help, but that even can get frustrating because, you may have literally 6 or 9 months of pictures right next to each other of progression, and you might not see all that much just because the natural, rate of growth for an athlete is going to be, low, especially if they're highly trained. This is going to be my, I think, 7th year in August, trained specifically for bodybuilding, and my rate of gain is definitely slowed down. I mean, shit, I remember one time, and this is like before I even started bodybuilding, I gained like 15 pounds over a summer, like when I went through puberty. I happened to be picking up weights at that same time. Obviously, I was eating a ton anyway when I was a young, young adult, young adolescent, whatever you want to call it. And I gained a ton of weight, a ton of muscle in a very short amount of time. And obviously, that's not going to happen anymore. That was like a perfect storm. So I would really rely on strength gain and just making sure that you're progressing your programs properly. I think that's like the biggest one to focus on. And as I talked about earlier in the video, I know that Julie might not have been here when I said it because I saw that she came in a little bit later. But we want to make sure that our training intensity is just as high in the off season as it is during contest prep. And I feel like that's where a lot of people, they think they're getting stronger when they start a contest prep, when in reality, I feel like they're just trying harder when contest prep starts, so their weights actually start to climb when they start to diet, because all along in their off season, they were just kind of putting it on cruise control, and then they find themselves like, oh man, I have to try now, like I'm going to compete in 20 weeks, I better actually start working. So I think just writing down your weights from week to week, and I mean, I keep a book, a journal, every workout of every day of the week, all year long. I've done it for the past, 3.5 years. I've done it for my entire lifting career, writing down all my weights. I have them, in the drawer, crumpled up, sweated on, torn apart, chicken scratched writing. So I really feel like you should focus on, increasing the weight, because if we know over time, if we're increasing the weight, we are increasing, the muscle size. So that was a great question, Julie. Holly asked a handful of questions here, so I'll take them one at a time. I don't want to go too fast, so I'll just break them down one by one. So Holly asked, how do you speed up and reset a sluggish metabolism? How do you address the cause of the metabolism to see if it's hormonal, adrenal fatigue, overtraining, undertraining, etc.? So that's a tough one. A sluggish metabolism. So I guess we have to realize that as we do age, our metabolism does change. And I've noticed that, and I know I'm only 26 years old, but from my previous contest prep in 2015 when I was 23, my metabolism has changed. Obviously, I'm not at the lowest body fat percentage that I was in 2015, but my lowest intake in 2015 was 255 grams of carbohydrates a day. Equal protein to that, so 255, and I believe my fat got down to maybe 50. I think it might have actually been 55, so it might have been like 55s across the board. And that was low for then, but now I bet you I'll have to get lower. We'll see. Time will tell, but obviously I've gained muscle. So what other factors are changing? It's age. And I feel like that's one of the biggest contributing factors is time. Our bodies change with time, and that's just something that we have to deal with. How do we know if it's hormonal, adrenal fatigue, overtraining? I really don't believe in overtraining, honestly. If we were spending an hour and a half to 2 hours in the gym, I think, which I think a lot of us do, and I don't think that's going to get us to overtrain in one bit. How do you know if it's hormonal? Obviously that's going to be more of a doctor thing. Some people have thyroid issues, and then blood tests have to be done, in order to see that. Undertraining, no, I don't think it's due to undertraining reset a sluggish metabolism. I mean, if you get hurt and, Matt was talking about energy expenditure. If your energy expenditure goes way down, then sure, that might contribute to a sluggish metabolism. And I know Holly was hurt here for a little bit, so that might have had something to do with it. But now, since our energy expenditure is up, since we're working out harder, I would throw that one out the window as well. Holly's second question is, how do you respond to a client if they've been training hard and all of a sudden they feel like they're going backwards in their lifts, for example, having to lower the weights and they get the reps when they prior were able to do the weight every week? What is the body telling us when this is happening? So if they're in the middle of an off season, which is kind of the main focus of this episode, I would say is that's when we might have to change the rep scheme up a little bit. Maybe we have been running a program for a little bit too long and we just need a different stimulus. Maybe you are getting a little bit burned out on that. Now, if you're in a contest prep and the weights start to go down, I wouldn't be too alarmed. If you're in a mini cut, if you're in a longer deficit phase, a longer mini cut, if you're going into a contest prep, like I said earlier in the video, we know our strength is going to go down eventually because we might be losing some lean tissue. Hopefully not a lot, obviously, but I wouldn't be too alarmed if the weights start to go down. That's when we might have to take a deload. And I talked a couple weeks ago, I believe, about deloads in one of my YouTube videos, so I won't cover that too much. But once a year or twice a year, I think it is, I actually take like 5 consecutive days off from the gym, just to kind of help me reset a little bit. I did that when I got married in last year in August. This year, I don't know when I'm going to do it since I'm in contest prep. I don't know if I could force myself to take that much time off, but we're going to see. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. Anyway, let's go on to Holly's last question here. Why is the hardest thing for females to accept in order to get bigger that they have to get bigger? And at what point do you address the bigger? There's a lot of biggers here, and decide if it's increased muscle mass or putting fat on too fast. So that's where pictures come into play a lot. And she goes on to say, do you measure by looking by pictures, the scale, the fact that the clothes don't fit? I would say that, I try to think of all those factors. Obviously, like, women tend to tell me more than males, like that their clothes are fitting tighter in certain places than others. I feel like they pay more attention to that as opposed to men. So yeah, that's one of the contributing factors, I would say. But as long as like your strength is going up and the pictures are still looking good, the body composition is looking good. Now we do have to realize that we can't look contest shape all season round. That's one thing that I think a lot of us do struggle with. That's something that I struggled with when I was first starting out. You get to contest shape, and I started when I was pretty young. I started when I was 19, and I was like, damn, I really like the way that I look, when I get lean, but I have to gain more muscle, and in order for me to gain more muscle, I do have to put on some weight. Now, I will stop there real quick because I do want to talk about one of my biggest mistakes, and I talked about it earlier in the video, but I didn't say this specifically, but it's chasing a weight. And I don't think that any woman will do this, but this is more of a male driven thing. It's when we try to chase a weight, and that's just not something that's smart. In all honesty, we shouldn't be trying to chase weights just because that's how you end up getting fat. And I did that before. I went from trying to chase 200. I wanted to be over 200 pounds. I got there. I got to 210, and I was hefty. And I don't want to see 210 again. I might see 210 in 3, 4, 5 years. I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever see 210 again, for that matter. The heaviest I got this year was like 205, 203, 205. Last year, I should say. This year, I've obviously been in a contest prep. So I would say, don't make the mistake of chasing a number in your off season. That's kind of more directed at the males. You don't want to you don't want to do that. That's how you get fat, and that's how you end up ruining your next contest prep. You just want to avoid that at all possible. All right, so the next one, I think that Holly might have had here. We'll go back to it and we'll see. If anybody has any more questions in the live stream here, feel free to to comment. Matt Jackson said, "Getting fat sucks." Yeah, it does suck. All right, let's see here. I actually had a few more questions rolling on in. And Julie said, "How can I eat as much as I want and still maintain my abs?" And I think Julie was just trying to troll me on that one, so I will avoid that one and say, Julie, you know better. All right, Holly asked a couple other good ones here. She said, what are the signs that a person is getting too much caffeine per day, and what are the negative side effects of that caffeine intake? Is 2 cups of coffee throughout the day, 1 to 2 scoops of pre-workout, roughly 350 milligrams, too much? How do you cycle off caffeine? I'm guessing that cold turkey is going to get them result in the major headaches. Yep. Yeah, so I mean that's tough when everybody deals with caffeine differently. And I gotta move this, slipping a little bit. But anyway, I would say that if you're keeping your caffeine intake under 400 milligrams a day total, I don't think that you'll have any problem with it. Just because I think that people abuse their caffeine intake, and by abuse I mean they have coffee in the morning, they have an energy drink during the day, and then they have their pre-workout at night. That's how you develop issues with caffeine, in my opinion. For me personally, and I get made fun of a lot for this, is how I cycle my caffeine. So I take a pre-workout every single day that I train. I train 6 days a week. But I take like a half a scoop of Core Fury. Fury has, I believe, 400 milligrams of caffeine in it. So I take half that, which is 200 milligrams. On some days, I only take Core ABCD, which is our branch chain energy product. And that only has 125 milligrams of caffeine in it. I don't drink any energy drinks, and I rarely take an energy drink at all. I can't tell you the last time I actually had an energy drink. It's probably been 3 or 4 years, if I really had to put a timeline on it. So I would say that on the days where you need it more, let's say like you're going to lift heavy for a heavy squat or for a heavy deadlift, like, yeah, up your caffeine. But don't take caffeine earlier in the day. I mean, I know some people think that they really need their coffee, in the morning, and my phone's going crazy here, and their coffee in the morning to get things going. But in all honesty, I'm more of a morning person. I don't struggle getting up and going in the morning, so I can't make any recommendations on that. But I think that if you cycle your caffeine throughout the week, that you actually will never have to come off. I haven't come off caffeine in years, honestly, in 6 years. Like, I just keep it going strong. I mean, sure, for those 5 days that I take off from the gym, I don't necessarily take caffeine on those days. So I mean, I guess once or twice a year, I go 4 or 5 days without having caffeine. But I haven't cycled completely off for weeks or weeks, for years at a time, and I feel fine. All right, and then Lydia asked one more, and then I'll go to Matt's here in a sec. She said, do I aim my clients towards an off-season calorie intake goal since we have calories to cut from when in prep? So I like where Lydia's going with that. The answer is actually no. I don't have a specific calorie goal in mind because I feel like that would be irresponsible. I would like to see someone's calories get as high as they can with keeping their weight in check. But for instance, Lydia is one of my clients, if I wanted her to get to 3,000 calories a day, and that was my goal. I mean, I know that's like an exaggeration, but I'm just trying to prove a point. And my goal was for Lydia to get to 3,000 calories, and I got her to my one goal. What's it going to do to her physique, Is it going to blow her up like a whale? Potentially. 3,000 calories for, your average sized woman is a lot. And I don't know if ever I've had somebody get up to 3,000 calories or over, maybe close in the middle of their off season, but very rarely. I think the highest one might be like 2,800, which is damn close. But yeah, I mean, you just have to up their calories enough where their performance is high, they're looking good, but they don't want to they don't want to get fat. We talked about that earlier. The goal of the off season is not just to get fat for the sake of getting fat. It's to increase muscle growth. It's not necessarily shooting for a calorie. All right, so Matt said, one last one here, guys, and then I'll probably wrap it up. Matt said, off-season cardio, hit versus steady state, only during a mini cut. Sorry if you gave your perspective. I know we have talked about this, and a question I get a lot. All right, so I really don't like to do too much cardio during a mini cut. I like to do a lot more food cutting, if anything. But I think what Matt is getting at is what kind of cardio would I recommend if I had somebody do it. So, for instance, if somebody has a very active job, where if they're like a nurse, or if they're on their feet a lot throughout the course of the day, they're already doing a lot of like steady state cardio, more of LISS. So they're already having a fairly high energy expenditure. They're already very active. And I don't believe that giving them more LISS or even MISS, which is a little bit more intense, roughly 60-80% of your max volume, or your max effort, I believe that giving them MISS is not going to help them much at all because they're already used to that stimulus. So what I've personally been doing for people that have more active jobs is actually giving them more HIIT because it's a different stimulus. Now, someone who has a more sedentary job, I could give them LISS or I could give them MISS, and they will probably lose more weight. Not necessarily saying that they can't handle HIIT, but if we could lose weight doing a less intense form of cardio, I feel like, once again, that won't negatively affect our performance in the gym. So that's the method that I've been utilizing more recently, and is just evaluating the person, based off their job, based off their activity level. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And thanks for the thumbs up, Matt. But all right, guys, that is going to conclude this week's video, all about off seasons. If you guys want to listen to the replay, it will be on my YouTube channel probably tomorrow, sometime during the day. I do appreciate everybody tuning in as always, and I will see you guys next week. As always, keep crushing it and have a great rest of your night.